Well, it's now October, and it's been over 3 months since I last did a review about the performance of my solar panel arrays. So in this video, we're going to review how the solar panels have performed for the months of July, August and September, and crucially, what's changed since 2021. We're also going to look at further details about the performance of my SolarEdge battery, which is newly commissioned. Now, if you haven't watched my previous videos, my name is Anthony and I own a 9 kilowatt solar panel array up here in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. There's many videos I've got previously about the performance of these panels. I invite you to go and have a look at them. But for now, let's go to my studio and let's crunch the numbers. So here we have the overall picture of what happened during July, August and September. So in July of 2022, we did far better in terms of generation compared to 2021, just under 1 megawatt hour of electricity. August, we didn't have all the data for August. This is up to 24th of August. In actual fact, we got up to 945 kilowatt hours. Now I can determine this from the My Energy app. We've got generation data for each day. Now September was quite disappointing. We measured about 550 kilowatt hours of generation using the My Energy app. Now, one of the things I will say is that the My Energy app tends to underreport on generation compared to SolarEdge. Once we add on about 20 to 30 kilowatt hours, we are around the 570 kilowatt hour mark for September. Compared to 2021, not so good. But that is more than offset by the generation that we had for July and August, beating previous 2021 figures. So into July, we had 4 days which were above 40 kilowatt hours of generation, and 1 day of those was above 50 kilowatt hours of generation. Now bear in mind, the record production for my inverter was just under 60 kilowatt hours in early June. This is what I would consider to be almost a reference sunny day. As you can see, we had generation clipped at just over 5 kilowatts, and that is down to the fact that our car was fully charged. So we had some charging of the hot water tank in the middle of the day just to bring up the output, and what you can see here is that we had 6.5 kilowatts of output. What I find is that in May, when the weather was cooler, we could get just over 7 kilowatts of output on a sunny day. This day in particular, that was the 10th of July, that was one of the really very hot days that we had. I think the temperature here reached about 31 degrees, maybe even 32 degrees Celsius, which is remarkable for Aberdeenshire to get that hot. We're typically much closer to 18 to 20 degrees in this part of the world during the summertime. Now, the worst day was the 23rd of July, and here we generated 16 kilowatt hours of electricity. You can imagine if we had a SolarEdge battery, we would be able to fully discharge it, and then we could fully recharge it with the surplus electricity here. 9.62 kilowatt hours of export, that could all go into a SolarEdge Energy Bank. The remarkable thing about August that you can see here is the number of days that exceeded 40 kilowatt hours. We can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days which breached the 40 kilowatt hour mark. One of those days actually breached 50 kilowatt hours, and one was just shy of 50 kilowatt hours. This day here was another record day in terms of temperature. Here you can see we've made much better use of the sunshine, and we were peaking at around 6.4 kilowatt hours of solar production. If we go to a much cooler day, so here's a later day in August, we generated 40 kilowatt hours for this day. This is the 20th of August, and we peaked out at 7.8 kilowatt hours. And that's the difference between a hot sunny day and a much cooler day where you also have some periodic cloud coming about. What I tend to find is that the output of my solar panels peaks when you get direct sunshine, but you also get some rather wispy clouds in the near vicinity. And what that tends to do is scatter even more light onto the solar panels. So without a battery, what you can see is that in July, we imported just 53 kilowatt hours of electricity. So that's just under 2 kilowatt hours per day. And into August, we imported roughly the same amount. And what we didn't have the SolarEdge battery in commission, but we did have my little Bluetti 2.4 kilowatt hour battery. So for the month of September, what we can use is the My Energy account. And what you can see here is the amount of electricity that was consumed from my Sunshine and the amount of electricity that was exported from Sunshine. So all told, we imported about 97 kilowatt hours of electricity. That import was focused particularly towards the end, and this was a time when we actually switched from Octopus Agile to Octopus Go. And what that meant was that we could then charge the car overnight. And as you can see there, we've got 20 kilowatt hours of charging, which happened there. As you can see, the exports were abundant during the early month. That was down to the fact that we weren't actually at home. We were on holiday, and you can have a look at my holidays for the Outer Hebrides. But as we go further through the month, you can see that generally speaking, production was maintained pretty much until the last week of September, and then production took a bit of a nosedive right until the end here. So how does that convert into money? Well, for the year so far, we've returned just over £1,200 up until the end of September. You compare that for the whole of the first year, where the value was about £760. What we find is that when we dive into the numbers, over £500 of that value was returned by virtue of saving electricity on the Octopus Go tariff. Now, I'm not comparing the savings against the Octopus Agile tariff, because Octopus Go would be the tariff that I would have been on if I didn't have solar panels. But in addition to that, we've also got export revenue. Now, export revenue was over £750 so far this year. It's astonishing. We've exported far less this year than we did the year before. We're about 3 megawatt hours of export for 2022, and that compares to 4.5 megawatt hours of export for the whole of 2021. So exports are less because of my electric car, but export revenue is much higher. For July and August in particular, I've been seeing the export price on Octopus Agile rise up from 25 pence per kilowatt hour in July, and it was getting close to about 33 pence, 35 pence per kilowatt hour in August on average. It's astonishing. September, a lot more subdued. Both the quantity exported and the price we're getting for that export is much lower. But now we're on the Octopus Go tariff as of Tuesday the 27th, so one day after my battery was commissioned. So now the export price that we get is 4.1 pence per kilowatt hour. It's a lot less, but I'm not expecting to export all that much during the winter time, so that's not a big deal. Well, I made part 3 of my energy bank review on day number 3 of energizing this battery for the first time. We're now on day number 9, and the question is, what further insights have I got about the performance of this battery? So with the SolarEdge Energy Bank, one thing I noticed quite frequently was that we would be importing maybe 20 to 30 watts of power from the grid into the house. This typically happened when the fridge freezer would kick in. It would also happen when my dehumidifier was used in one time, and it would also be a feature during cooking. So what I want to do is perform some analysis. And what we can do, we can go down to the import meter and we can measure power. We get this nice graph here. I've chosen a period where we haven't been charging the car up overnight. So if we export this and we choose a 15-minute resolution, so we can export all of this information to a spreadsheet. And what you can see is that overnight, we've got absolutely no import for long periods of time. And then we get periods elsewhere where we do get a small amount of import. Things do get a lot more noisy during the daytime. And what's been going on this particular day is that we have been running a dehumidifier after running a washing machine. And you can see there's about 10 to 20 watts worth of import sometimes. Going into the evening time, we will have a period of time here, for example, when we've got some cooking going on my induction stove. My theory is that the power management of the inverter is incorrectly set up. So what I think is going on here is that somewhere in the software power management control, it is comparing apparent power and trying to balance it out with real power somewhere else. And what that ends up with is an imbalance which results in import. So apparent power is always bigger than real power. It takes into account inductive and capacitive loads. And typically what you find is that motors are always inductive. Same goes for your induction stove. What happens is that you get a phase imbalance between your current and your voltage. So you can have situations where your voltage in your AC cycle is 0 and you are measuring a current due to that induction. I think this can be solved with a software update to the inverter, and we should, in theory, have a situation where we measure no import whatsoever when the battery has some charge. So ever since the battery was commissioned, if we exclude overnight charging of the electric car, we're getting an import of about 0.5 to 0.6 kilowatt hours per day, just by virtue of these features of the battery. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but when you aggregate that over the course of a whole year, it is equivalent to about £70 worth of electricity at 40 pence per kilowatt hour. That's fairly significant. I've seen other videos for other battery systems, in particular Pylon Tech and Victron, and the import from the grid for these systems is much lower. And that's an AC coupled battery. It's worth bearing that in mind. Whereas this is a DC coupled battery. Okay, so to calculate efficiency, we can use the data analysis on the monitoring platform. Here we've got battery. We can look at charged power, discharge power, state of energy. We can then look at the period of time that we want to analyze. So in this case, the 1st to the 4th of October. And what you can see is that on the 1st of October and the 3rd of October, we got up to 100% state of charge. So what we can do is we can add up all of the energy which was discharged from 100%, and we can also add the energy which was put back into the battery to get us back into the 100% state of charge. So this is your discharge and charge cycle. Now, in a situation where we've got 100% efficiency, the two numbers should match up. We've got an efficiency of 94.5% in paper terms. Let's see how it fares in real life. So in columns A, B, C, and D, this is the raw data which was output from the SolarEdge portal. We've got 15-minute resolution here, and you can see, for example, that there's no charging going on at night time, but there is some discharging. So what we've got here is a situation where the battery is being discharged at 1.5 kilowatts during the middle of the night. This is charging up my car, ready for my weekend adventures the following morning. And then once the sun comes up around 7:15, then we're starting to charge the battery again. So what we're going to do is add up the power for each 15-minute period, divide by 4, and we do the same again for charging. This is the result that we've got. So from overnight 1st to 2nd of October, we discharged 4.3 kilowatt hours and we charged 6.4 kilowatt hours. That gave us an efficiency of 68.2% in the first instance. And for the 2nd to 3rd of October, we got an efficiency of 75%. Now, over 9 days that I've been running this battery, the overall efficiency is working out at between 73 and 75%. There doesn't seem to be any improvement in efficiency. The other thing that we need to note is that this is just simply measuring the charge and discharge from the battery. It's not measuring any losses at the inverter. So if we take this number here and we apply a 90% inverter efficiency, I was quite disappointed with these numbers, as you can imagine. I decided to investigate this even more. So what I've got here are 3 samples for each day. We're looking at discharge overnight in 3 different periods, one for the whole night, one for the period where we're awake, and one for the period where we are asleep. The efficiency of discharge is about 85% to 78% when we're at very low loads. This is fairly typical for the 3 days. When it comes to charging efficiency, we are around 80 to 90% charge efficient. The 4th of October was a very slow day indeed. And the 3rd of October, you can see that the overall charge rate is not much faster. There doesn't seem to be any correlation between charge rate and efficiency. It just seems to be the case that when you're charging, you're less efficient than when you're discharging. So in conclusion, certain aspects of this battery can certainly be improved with a firmware update. But overall, I'm very disappointed with the efficiency of this battery. The marketing material suggests 94.5% round-trip efficiency, and the measurements, not including the inverter, are getting closer to around 75–76%. I can eke out about 78% in the best case. That's not even considering the losses that you have in the inverter when you're outputting to the grid. Do I think they can improve on that? I'm really not sure. If I measure the heat, there is heat coming out of the back through these fins. These fins, cooling fins at the back, they're only at the top end of the battery. That's where your power electronics are. Down here, that's where your battery cells are. So in traditional terms, we're not talking about internal battery resistance coming from battery chemistry. We're talking about power electronics. That's where your losses are. Well, now that I've asked the question, how efficient is my battery? It's worth also asking the question, how efficient is the inverter? The marketing material suggests 99% efficiency, but let's see what the data comes up with. So we're going to look at 4 data sets. We're going to look at input in the inverter from the photovoltaic string. We're going to look at input to the inverter from the battery. And then we're going to look at outputs from the inverter to the house distribution. And we're going to look at output from the inverter to the battery. We end up with a nice graph like this, and we export this as a file. So what we end up with is 5 columns, which are output from the data analysis tools that we have on the monitoring platform. What we're going to do is look at the difference between the inputs into the inverter and the outputs coming out. That difference is the wattage, which is lost as heat inside the inverter. So from this information, we can also calculate the efficiency of the inverter. So looking at this data here, you can see that for high inputs, we've got very good inverter efficiency. We do have some peculiar examples here where the inverter seems to be more than 100%. And what I think is going on here is that the data coming from the analysis tool is not necessarily the mean data. This could just simply be the last value in this time period. There are ways of logging data. You can measure the mean for a particular time period. You can measure the last known value. You can measure a random sample in this time period. I've got a feeling that this is not mean information, which is a bit unfortunate. But going on, we can see that as the inverter output drops, so does the efficiency. When there's no string input whatsoever, we've just got a steady low load of about 300 watts, and we can see about 92 to 95% efficiency. When we do have additional output, in this instance cooking, the inverter efficiency improves to 98%. And overnight, when we are asleep, the outputs are very low indeed. And as you can see, they are much closer to 74%. In some instances, they are as low as 50%. And this is for extremely low outputs, around 20 watts. All told, my battery has now discharged 40 kilowatt hours of electricity over the course of 9 days. So that's about £18 worth of avoided grid imports at 40.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So roughly £15 per day worth of avoided imports in the first week of October, last week of September. So you can extrapolate that to £60 a month, but it's going to be even bigger, the savings, because the amount of daylight is drawing in quite quickly now. So I reckon we're probably going to be looking at £100 a month worth of avoided grid imports in November time. So we'll see what the actual numbers come up with. Now, if SolarEdge is watching this video and they take this feedback, hopefully that will result in better firmware, which results in better power and energy management for my battery. So yes, it's saving money, and I'm hoping it's going to be even more efficient in the future. So I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you again very soon.